Today, we are bringing you another installment of our player evaluation series. Today, we will be taking a deep dive on the captain, Jamie Benn, talk about the best parts of his season, talk about the things that he left to be desired, and talk about what the outlook is for him coming in 2022, 2023, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, coming to you on this Thursday, June 2nd. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by today's episode and for making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. Be sure to subscribe to our show, follow the podcast wherever you listen, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. We are free and available no matter where you listen or how you listen. You can also find and follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and our show as well at Locked On Stars. Be sure to give us a follow there if you do not do so already. Thank you guys for the continued support on the show throughout the offseason. We will be continuing episodes 5 days a week through the month of June, going over kind of the season that was for this Dallas Stars team, while also looking ahead. Some other episodes this week have been focused on the retirement or the departure of other players like Spezza and Radulov. But now we're jumping back into our player evaluation series, talking about the captain of the Dallas Stars, Jamie Benn. This is a guy that always has big expectations placed upon him going into every season. And those expectations are placed upon him because of the C that he wears on his sweater. And the story of Jamie Benn this season is told in the penalty box. I mean, this is a guy that had 88 penalty minutes. That was a team high on the Dallas Stars. I believe that was 20th most in the entire league, which was actually lower than I thought it would be when I went to look that stat up. But nonetheless, there were a plethora of guys that got in more penalty trouble than Jamie Benn, which was pretty shocking if you watched most of the Stars games this season. But I think there's a dual side to the amount of penalty minutes that Jamie Benn took this season. And I mean, 88 is a lot. Radek Faksa was second on the Stars with 52. And a lot of the minutes that Jamie Benn did stack up were for fighting. So, of course, you get the 5-minute marker there instead of just a 2-minute minor. You get the 5-minute major for fighting, which Jamie Benn did a lot of fighting this season, which is kind of the good side of this, is that he was sticking up for his teammates. Jamie Benn's not normally one that will just go out and fight a guy for the sake of fighting a guy. It wouldn't surprise me if that's something that he did at times, but really at this point in his career, if Jamie Benn is dropping the gloves with someone, it is likely in defense of a teammate, or it's him sticking up for himself. If he laid an aggressive hit on an opposing player and someone on that player's team is going after him, Jamie Benn, not afraid to drop the gloves and get dirty with another player and get into fights. And we saw that plenty of times this season. And I think that's good in the sense that he more often than not was sticking up for his players. I mean, there were several instances, especially with some of the younger guys, where we even got to ask them. I know in one post-game press conference in particular, I got to speak with Jacob Peterson about a fight that Jamie got involved in. I believe it was against the Winnipeg Jets at home, if I'm not mistaken, where, you talk about, Jacob Peterson taking a rough hit, and then the captain of the team comes in to defend you and protect you as a rookie on the team. It doesn't matter who it was that was getting attacked or, targeted. Jamie Benn would stick up for anyone on the team. And I think that's a good sign for him this season. That was just kind of the role that he fell into this season, was the enforcer of the team. And it just kept happening. People kept getting into fights with Jamie, despite his 6'2", 210-pound frame. Not the biggest guy in the league, but certainly not a small guy by any stretch of the imagination. A guy that I certainly wouldn't want to get into a fight with, but some people not afraid of the challenge. And it's just one of those things where I think Jamie Benn knows that he isn't always the biggest offensive threat, especially at this point in his career, but he can still find a way to be somewhat effective on the ice by getting under people's skin. He's a pretty disliked player outside of the city of Dallas. Just even speaking with other people, whether it's other hosts here on the network, or just general musings on Twitter, I can see that Jamie Benn sometimes is the butt end of a joke on hockey Twitter, just for this reason, that he can get under people's skin. He can come off as a little bit arrogant. I think that there's just a little bit of a quieter side to him that sometimes doesn't always come out. And so, he's a hard guy to read at times, but at the end of the day, I think he's a guy that's loyal to his teammates and a guy that will stick up for his teammates, any circumstances, no questions asked. And with that said, I mean, like I said, he's not the most dazzling offensive player this past season, but there were still moments where he could be really effective in a timely manner on offense for the Stars team. I mean, he had 2 overtime goals, both of them coming on the road, one early in the season, early November against the Calgary Flames. That was a huge win for the Dallas Stars as they'd gotten off to a rough start rather, in the early goes of the regular season. And that was a huge road win against what turned out at the time to be a good Calgary team and what turned out to be a fantastic Calgary team at the end of the season. And then a win on the road at Anaheim. Jamie Benn scores the overtime game-winning goal in that game as well. A time in the year where every win was important. Every single point was important for the sake of positioning and playoff standings. And Jamie Benn makes sure that his team got 2 points in that game against the Ducks in Anaheim. And even in the playoffs, he had a big moment. He scored the first goal of Game 7. He scored it early. He set the tone for his team in that game. Unfortunately, the result was not what the Dallas Stars wanted, but there's a lot to be said about Jamie Benn coming out and scoring as quickly as he did, setting the tone for the entire roster early in the game. And he was on attack mode early on, and I think, even despite the loss, you could see that the Stars were on attack mode for the majority of that Game 7 against Calgary. So he may not always have been the offensive centerpiece, but Jamie Benn certainly did step up several times when needed, whether it was with a goal, with a timely pass that led to an assist, or getting into a fight and sticking up for a teammate. Jamie Benn just always seemed to be at the right place at the right time when he was needed. Because, again, I think there are other guys on this team this past season that fit the role of the offensive provider, as much as we would love to see Jamie Benn be Art Ross Jamie Benn yet again. I just don't know if we're ever going to see him rise to that level, given that he is starting to age slowly. But overall, a fairly productive season for Jamie Benn, and he was still effective more often than not, despite some flaws, which we'll talk about in a second. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. Built Bar granola bars are unbelievable, and they come in 3 fantastic flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. If you want to try all 3 flavors, you can get a mixed box at built.com right now. There are so many different bars and the puffs, but granola bars from Built Bar are loaded with granola. It's the perfect combination of crunch and chewiness. But just like bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and covered in 100% real chocolate. With 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar, Built granola bars will change your world. Built has cracked the code to better granola. They are perfectly healthy to snack on, to put in your lunch, to take on the road with you. Wherever you're going, it is the perfect snack. And you can go to Built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off your order at Built.com. Hey, Stars fans, we're about to get back to the show, but real quick, I have an important favor to ask you. We've put together a survey so we can learn more about listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcast even better. This is your opportunity to tell us what you like and what you don't like about Locked On podcasts. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long, and everyone that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. To take our audience survey, go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. Thank you guys so much for your help, and let's get back to the show. And we're moving on this Thursday episode of Locked On Stars. This is your host, Dane Lewis here. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. We are talking about Jamie Benn, talking about the season that he had in 2021, 2022. And as much as we love to see Jamie Benn being the enforcer for this team, sticking up for his teammates, I mentioned it a little bit at the top of the last segment. Those penalty minutes had a negative effect on the team at times. I mean, as much as it's good to see him, taking charge and, being the guy that kind of does the heavy lifting for this team as far as physicality, sometimes there was a negative side to that. I mean, Jamie Benn has been one of Dallas's better forwards on the PK in recent years. Certainly not the best guy as far as forwards on the PK, but a guy that you can put out there and you can feel pretty comfortable with having him out there for, 45 seconds to a minute of penalty kill time. But with those 88 penalty minutes, more often than not, Jamie Benn was not available to be out there for the PK, which could make things challenging for the Stars. And especially early in the season when the penalty kill wasn't very good, I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Jamie Benn could not be out there because he was the one sitting in the box, unable to do anything for 2 to 5 minutes at a time. And, sometimes it just seemed like there were moments where maybe Jamie was caught up too much in the physical side of the game or the extracurriculars of the game. And I'm not saying that he wasn't trying to score, trying to pass, that he was specifically just going at guys. But, there might have just been moments where he was just being too physical along the boards and really only focusing on checks or not really, giving it his all as far as, getting set up for shots or entering the zone well, setting up teammates on the assist. And, it's just one of those things that it didn't stick out like a sore thumb, but definitely something that you noticed at times. Just, it seemed like maybe there was too much going on, and Jamie hoping that other people would carry the load. I obviously don't know that that's what he was thinking. I can't, put those thoughts in his head or put those words in his mouth, but there's just sometimes it felt that way. I mean, this is a guy that's been the captain of the team for I don't even know how many years now, but for really quite some time now. And has kind of just been a given name with the Dallas Stars. I mean, he's been attached to this franchise since he was drafted, and a guy that around the league is synonymous with this organization's name. And yet at times this season, it just felt like there were games where, though he was out there on the ice, that he was just absent and not fully there, at least whenever the Stars needed him most. And that's not to say that he was absent all the time. I mentioned several moments from this season where he was present and he did come up big, but those moments were just too far and in between. And this has kind of been the beating the dead horse of these season evaluations for these players, especially some of these latter players that we've covered, like Sagan, Klingberg, and even Jamie Benn now, that Ben was another guy that really needed to be another secondary scoring option for this Dallas squad, but just fell short on that at several moments. Again, there were moments where he did look great, where he looked like kind of a form of his former self, but more often than not, it just was not meant to be, and it just wasn't very encouraging to see offensively for a guy that's going to be making $9.5 million a season through the 2024-2025 season. He and Tyler Sagan catching a lot of flack from Stars fans for getting paid all this money, yet their production seems to be going down by the year. And Jamie Benn doesn't quite have the same reasoning, I think, as Tyler. I mean, with Tyler, you can at least make the argument of injuries and surgeries, whereas Jamie, we haven't really seen any of that. It's just kind of seemed like a steady decline downward. And of course, he is getting older, but at the same time, 32 isn't that old. And we see Joe Pavelski about to hit 40 years old, playing the best season of his life this past year. So who knows what's going on? It's just one of those frustrating things where people like me or other people in the media try to defend him and say, well, he's still a good teammate. He still goes out and fights for his guys. He still is physical along the boards. He's a great penalty killer, but people want to look at the goals and they want to look at the offensive numbers because that's just what shows up more commonly on stock hockey stat sheets, and that's what people look for. I mean, people don't go onto Instagram or Twitter and look for, really nice checks along the boards or, really good face-off wins, which Jamie Benn is a pretty decent face-off guy. They go to look at really cool goals, and they go to look at great passes and great dekes and plays offensively. And that just wasn't something that Jamie Benn did a whole lot of this season. A lot of his goals, even that he did score, were pretty plain and simple, which is just kind of his style of play. And I don't know, if Stars fans are just displeased with the numbers dropping, and so now they're just frustrated with the lack of dazzle, like razzle dazzle, for lack of a better term. Let me just turn into an 80-year-old man real quick with my terminology there. But yeah, it's frustrating for people like me, myself. I mean, as a fan of this team, obviously love Jamie Benn and what he's done for this franchise, for this organization, for the city of Dallas. Still very involved and a guy that I want to see thrive and do well for this team. And really, just because he needs to, because he is taking up so much cap space. A guy that has won the Art Ross Trophy. It's just one of those things where, in my mind, he just needs to find something to add to his game here in the next few years to make him worth the money that he is being paid. Because we like the way that he's physical, we like the way that he's the enforcer for this team, but whether it's kind of getting back to his offensive efficiency or adding more defensively, there needs to be something added to his game in the offseason, or something done to change the way that he's able to produce. Because I can only see Stars fans getting more and more frustrated if he and Tyler Seguin both come out this next season and have put up similar stat lines, if not worse stat lines, which I don't anticipate that happening. But at the same time, I know that these fans are expecting great things from this franchise and from this organization, just because there has been some rumblings of success in the past few years. I mean, we were in the Stanley Cup Finals, 2 years ago, and game 7 of the first round this season. So there's still signs that this franchise can do great things, and I think these fans realize that now is the time. And if we wait too long, that the window is going to close, and then we're going to maybe not be in a full rebuild, but be in a position where the playoffs might not be a possibility, or making it past the first round might not be a possibility. And to me, it just all starts with Jamie Benn. I think he does a lot of things well, including being the leader in the locker room and leading by example more often than not. But we need to continue to see that, and we need to continue to see a little bit more development of his game. True great players in any sport know that they are never fully done developing or fully done getting better. And I think Pavelski is another fantastic example of that, continuing to be the first guy at practice every day, working on his tip-ins in front of the net, his redirects, his rebound shots. Not saying that's exactly what Jamie has to do, but I'm hoping he can find something to do where he can fully pour himself into it and become a better player despite his age going up. So that way he can be worth the money, and a guy that will be remembered well by the Stars faithful whenever his time in Dallas is all done. But we are going to continue to talk about Jamie Benn and talk about his future with the team as it pertains to next season after we take another quick break. We're talking Jamie Benn on this Thursday episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for tuning in, for joining us today. We are talking about what the 22-23 campaign could look like for Jamie Benn. And I know I spent a little bit of the last segment being a little critical of Jamie. And obviously, again, I'm saying that I like Jamie Benn a lot as a player. I think as a leader of this franchise, of this team, of this roster, that he's done well in that position. And so I'm not doubting his leadership ability at all. Just, I think with, to quote, Spider-Man or Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think Jamie Benn has been given a lot of power, a lot of responsibility. And I hope to see him kind of deliver on some of that this next season. So obviously, with the amount of money that he's being paid, I do believe he will be with the team next season, still going to be the captain. And I think he will still continue to be a good captain. I've heard some people say that he doesn't need to be the captain anymore because of his lack of production. But really, I mean, across the NHL, we see it. The captain of your team doesn't always have to be the best player on your team. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you get a Sidney Crosby or an Alexander Ovechkin, a Connor McDavid type player. But you see some other examples like Landeskog in Colorado. Landeskog might be the 4th or 5th best player on that roster. He's a great player. He's good, but he's not the best player on that team. Spurgeon in Minnesota, not the best player. Still a good player, also a little bit older in his own right, but not the best player on that team. Blake Wheeler in Winnipeg, and there's other guys I could go on and talk about, but you get the idea. Just because they have the C on their sweater does not necessarily mean they are the best player on the team. But sometimes it comes down to being the best leader of the team, which is more than just on the ice. I mean, being the leader of the team goes into the locker room. It goes into the off-ice stuff that we don't see, that goes on behind closed doors, that goes when the cameras aren't rolling or around. And I think based on what we've seen and what we've heard from teammates and from media, that Jamie Benn is the guy for that role. And of course, I'm interested to see how his role works with a new coach and with a new coaching staff. I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to watch, but still think that Jamie Benn is qualified to be the captain of the Dallas Stars. I certainly think that we could be watching the rise of the future captain of the team once Jamie retires or departs from Dallas. I think that and it's a conversation for another day, that Amiro Heiskanen or Jason Robertson, Rope Hintz could step up and potentially be the next captain of this team. But of course, that's a conversation again for another day, and something that we probably won't have to think about for a few seasons now. But I think Jamie will continue to be that good locker room presence. He will get to be yet another mentor to the young guys on this team right now and the guys coming up through the organization throughout the years. And it's not always going to be, that direct, like one-on-one conversation with them all the time mentoring, but just watching the way that Jamie goes about his business, being a true professional. It's something that I've talked about with Pavelski, something I've talked about with Sagan, and even guys like Radulov. I mean, Dallas has been blessed with so many great veterans throughout the years, especially in these recent seasons, for these young guys to look up to as far as their skill on the ice, but also just handling themselves as a professional athlete. And I think that's something that sometimes we can overlook, but something that with the Dallas Stars organization, that we are very fortunate to have some very mature and well-rounded men playing the sport of hockey here for the Stars. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of shift in Jamie Benn's offensive output for the better. Who knows what kind of work he's doing this offseason. I imagine just with how committed he has been to the sport, that he will be looking to improve his game. And I do think that, potentially getting a new line mate could also do wonders. I imagine we'll maybe see at least an attempt of reuniting Sagan and Ben on the same line. I think of Vlad Nemestikov would be a really interesting addition to play alongside those two. Or who knows who else the Stars could go out and get in free agency or via trade or via the draft. Who knows what this roster will look like at the start of the season, and maybe bringing in a fresh face to play alongside Jamie Benn could be what he needs to take his game to the next level here in the middle stages of his career. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen to the Locked On NHL podcast. From first round matchups to each Stanley Cup kiss, Locked On NHL covers the playoffs like no other. Hear the latest news and opinions from local experts every Monday through Friday. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast at. Be sure to subscribe to and follow the Locked On Stars podcast wherever you listen to your shows at, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. You can leave a comment, rating, or a review if you like what you hear. It helps the show out a ton. You can also find and follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and our show as well at Locked On Stars. The link to our audience survey for the $100 Ticketmaster gift card will also be in the description of today's episode. So be sure to go fill that out if you do feel so inclined. Just takes a few minutes, doesn't take too much of your time, and helps out our network a ton. But we will see you back here tomorrow, Stars fans. I hope you have a great Thursday.